The US government actually found usable technology that was in the Tesla files, and that material transmitted forward through the decades.
At 2:47 p.m. on March the 14th, 2024, Dr. James Whitmore flipped a switch Nikola Tesla had labeled, in his own handwriting, "Do not activate." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the chamber began to hum, low, chest deep, the kind of sound that vibrates inside your ribs before you hear it. The copper coils in the center of the room started to glow blue-green. Whitmore was already lunging back toward the panel when the building's emergency alarms went off. He yanked the switch to the off position. The device kept running anyway. The power was cut, the wires were dead, and the machine in the basement was still alive. Within 90 seconds, the building was being evacuated. Within 2 hours, the EPA had a response team on site. And within a week, 3 federal agencies were quietly requesting copies of every measurement the team had taken.
He even thought that he could eventually use the same system to jump power to different planets.
Tesla sealed this device away in 1943 with a warning. 80 years later, a research team broke the seal. The chamber. The building wasn't supposed to contain anything important. It was a storage warehouse on the edge of a university campus in the Northeast. Boxes of old lab equipment, filing cabinets nobody had opened in decades. The kind of structure that exists in the corner of every old institution, slowly forgotten. Dr. Whitmore wasn't looking for Tesla. He was a materials engineer.
There was a knowledge base located somewhere in the universe.
He had been pulled into a routine survey of the building because the university wanted to repurpose the space. He was reading old property records, maintenance logs, utility transfers, the boring paper trail that nobody bothers with. That trail had a problem. The building had been constructed in 1939. The basement walls were stone, far thicker than the foundation needed. The electrical service was vastly over-engineered for a structure that had only ever held boxes. And every time the university had upgraded its electrical grid over 8 decades, every single time, the basement had been quietly kept on the system. Nobody had ever explained why. Whitmore went down to look. The basement was larger than the records suggested. The published floor plans showed a single rectangular storage area. The actual layout had 3. The third was accessible through a service corridor that did not appear on any document Whitmore had been given. He found it by accident, following a copper conduit that ran along the ceiling and disappeared behind a stack of disused metal shelving. When he pushed the shelving aside, the corridor was there, narrow, lined with the same stone as the foundation. The air inside was noticeably cooler. At the end of that corridor was a door. It was steel, reinforced, heavier than any door in the building had any reason to be. The locking mechanism was industrial. Whoever built it wanted to keep something either in or out, and they were serious about it. It took the team nearly a week to open it safely.
Tesla was born during a lightning storm, and that this provides a powerful explanation for why later in life.
When the seal finally cracked, the air inside was stale but stable. The temperature had held constant for decades, protected by stone walls and total isolation from sunlight. The chamber was roughly 20 feet across. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with sheets of pure copper. In the center of the room stood the device. It was cylindrical, about 4 feet across, 6 feet tall, concentric copper rings stacked at precise mathematical angles, hundreds of hand-wound wire coils threaded through and around the rings, a massive resonance coil at the base, a ceramic insulator at the top pointed straight up like a conductor's baton waiting for a downbeat. Every surface was clean, not polished, clean. 80 years of sealed isolation had preserved it the way a museum vault preserves a manuscript. The copper had developed a thin film of oxidation, but the geometry was perfect. The windings had not slipped. The solder joints were intact. Whoever had built this device had built it to outlast the man who built it. It was nothing in any of Tesla's published patents. Around the device, on metal shelves bolted to the copper walls, were Tesla's notes, not the polished writing he submitted to journals, personal journals, sketches, equations scrawled in margins. Some of it was rigorous physics, some of it was something else. There were 12 bound notebooks in total, the earliest dated to 1937. The latest was dated November of 1942, barely 2 months before Tesla died. The handwriting tightened over time, becoming smaller and more controlled, as though Tesla had been trying to fit more thought into less space. Several pages had been torn out. Several others were marked with single words underlined twice: caution, contain, deliberate. One passage in particular stopped Dr. Elena Vasquez when she finally got to read it. Vasquez was the historian of science the team brought in to handle the documents. The line read, "The Earth itself is a conductor, wound like a coil. Strike the right frequency and all energy becomes free too. Those who know how to listen." The team photographed everything. They mapped the device. They ran electrical scans to see if any of it was still functional. The expectation was that nothing would respond. 80 years of disuse should have killed every component in the chamber. Capacitors leak, solder joints crystallize, wire windings shift and break their continuity. There was no scenario in which a device this old should have shown any sign of life. That's when they found the wiring. The device was connected, not by modern cabling, but by period-appropriate copper tubing that ran through the chamber walls and into the bones of the building. The tubing terminated in a massive capacitor bank, installed in 1941. The capacitors had degraded, but their terminals were intact.
People recognized that he was different. He was a genius.
And the whole network was still tied to the building's main electrical panel. For 80 years, every electrician who had ever worked in that basement had unknowingly preserved the connection. Renovation after renovation, upgrade after upgrade, the chamber circuit had been treated as legitimate building infrastructure. Nobody had asked what it powered. Nobody had traced it back. The chamber had never lost power. It had been waiting. The warning. The team had been in the facility for 3 weeks by this point. They had documented the device down to the gauge of the wire. They had read enough of Tesla's notes to understand what the chamber was designed to do. The question of whether it still worked was no longer academic. It was unbearable. One graduate student, Marcus Chen, suggested they fully document the wiring before doing anything else. It was the right call. Whitmore agreed. Then he went to find the panel anyway. The main electrical panel was on the basement's east wall, old, dust-coated, manual switches that had not been touched since Roosevelt was president. Most of the labels were illegible, faded into ghosts of letters by humidity and time. One label was still, once readable. It had been written in Tesla's own hand, in the tight, precise script that historians of science recognize on sight. 3 words: resonance chamber, do not activate. Whitmore stood in front of that panel for a long time. He photographed the label. The team discussed it. They discussed the safety protocols. They discussed what they didn't know about the device. They discussed the fact that Tesla had been one of the most cautious engineers of his generation when it came to his own work, and that his warnings were almost never theatrical. There was a counter-argument, and it was a strong one. The device had been sealed for 80 years. The capacitors were degraded. The wiring was original. Even if the chamber had been functional in 1941, the odds that it would still respond to current were vanishingly small. The most likely outcome of flipping the switch was nothing. A dead circuit, a moment of silence, confirmation that the warning was a relic from a man whose judgment had deteriorated in his final years. That was the argument the team kept returning to. It was almost certainly going to do nothing, and if it did nothing, they would have an answer. They could close the file. They could leave Tesla's warning in place as a historical curiosity rather than an open question, almost certainly. And then, at 2:47 p.m. on March 14th, 2024, Dr. James Whitmore reached up and flipped the switch. 90 seconds. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the chamber started to hum. Low, below conscious hearing. The team felt it in their sternums before they registered it as sound. The hum climbed. The copper coils began to glow. Not orange, the way overheated metal glows, but a steady cold blue-green light. No flicker, no buildup. The light was just suddenly there.
100,000 bulbs light up.
As though it had always been there, and somebody had just remembered to turn it on. The building's alarm system fired. Modern emergency systems, installed in the 1990s, designed to detect electrical fires, chemical leaks, structural failures. None of those things were happening. What they had detected was a field. A massive, organized, growing electromagnetic field radiating outward from the basement at an exponential rate. Whitmore ran for the panel. He grabbed the switch. He yanked it back. The device kept running. The capacitors had discharged. That charge had triggered a feedback loop in the coil system. Once the device crossed the threshold into resonance, it stopped depending on the input power. It became a closed system, sustaining its own field, drawing energy from somewhere the team could not immediately identify. For the first time in 80 years, Tesla's resonance chamber was alive, and the man who had turned it on could not turn it off. The alarms ran for 30 more seconds. The university's emergency response team physically pulled the master breaker, cutting all power to the entire basement level. The hum continued. Slowly, over the next minute, the blue-green light dimmed. The vibration in the floor faded. The device powered itself down on its own schedule, on its own terms. By the time silence returned to the chamber, the building was already being evacuated. Marcus Chen, the graduate student who had recommended waiting, was the last person out of the basement. He told a colleague later that the strangest thing about the activation was not the hum, or the light, or the alarms. It was the moment after the breaker was pulled, the instant when the device should have died and instead kept running. He said that was when he understood, for the first time, that they had not turned a machine on. They had woken something up. Whitmore did not disagree. Before we get to what that frequency actually was, and why the EPA showed up within 2 hours, hit subscribe. Because what Tesla built that machine to do is something the power industry has spent a century trying to keep buried. 7.83, the university called it a precautionary measure. That was the language of the press release. A precautionary evacuation while safety officers assessed an unexpected electromagnetic phenomenon in a basement laboratory. The truth was that nobody in the building knew what they were dealing with. The emergency systems had transmitted automatic alerts to the university safety office, and from there to the local fire department. The fire department took one look at the readings. An electromagnetic field strong enough to trigger industrial-grade safety equipment in a residential basement, and called the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA's environmental response team arrived within 2 hours. They brought dosimeters, field detectors, instruments calibrated for industrial accidents involving radiation and electromagnetic interference.
Tesla is working toward a better way for transmitting electrical power.
They wanted to know exactly what the device had done in those 90 seconds. The first measurements were taken at the chamber door. The team expected residual readings, the kind of low-level electromagnetic decay that follows any high-energy event. What they got instead was a structured pattern. The field had not dispersed randomly. It had radiated in concentric layers, like ripples on a pond, each one carrying the same harmonic signature. The numbers came back fast. The field Tesla's device had generated was the most powerful localized non-ionizing electromagnetic field the EPA team had ever recorded in a civilian setting. It had radiated outward from the chamber in a clean, organized pattern, and it had pulsed at a single, very specific frequency, 7.83 Hertz. That number is not arbitrary. The Earth itself oscillates at approximately 7.83 Hertz. The frequency is called the Schumann resonance, named after the physicist who calculated it in 1952. It is the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet, the frequency at which the entire space between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere vibrates. Every living thing on the planet sits inside that field. It surrounds us constantly. We just cannot feel it. Tesla had not known that name. Schumann formalized the measurement nearly a decade after Tesla died, but Tesla had calculated something close to it himself and by hand decades earlier. He had theorized that the Earth was a resonance system, that if a transmitter could match its frequency exactly, energy could be pushed into the planet itself, and the planet would carry that energy outward, indefinitely, in every direction at once. The team brought in Dr. Harold Chen, a physicist at Stanford who specializes in electromagnetic phenomena. Chen reviewed the device's design, the spacing of the coils, the diameter of the copper rings, the precise resistance values in the windings, the mass of the conductors. He spent 6 days inside the chamber with his own instruments before he was willing to commit to a written assessment. His conclusion was direct. The chamber was not a prototype. It was not a test rig. It was a finished, calibrated, functional transmitter. Every measurement matched Tesla's theoretical equations from 1901 with a precision that should not have been possible using 1940s instrumentation. The tolerances were tighter than modern fabrication standards. The harmonic alignment was exact. Tesla had built the device to a specification that current engineering, with all of its computational tools and laser precision manufacturing, could only barely replicate. Chen wrote in his memo to the Department of Energy that the chamber represented engineering work that was not just ahead of its time.
So this means that Tesla essentially won the war of the currents.
It was outside its time entirely. The device worked. The wireless transmission of electrical power on a planetary scale was not theoretical. It was not impossible. It was not the fever dream of an old man dying in a hotel room. Tesla had built it. Tesla had proven it. And then Tesla had locked it in a basement and labeled the switch. Why he locked it away. Tesla died on January 7th, 1943, in a hotel room in New York City. He was 86 years old. His patents were lapsing. His funding had vanished decades earlier. The official position of the physics establishment was that his later work had drifted into mysticism. Within hours of his death, agents from what would become the FBI arrived at the hotel. They seized every paper, every notebook, every drawing. They sealed his rooms. They cataloged his possessions. The seizure was carried out with a speed and thoroughness that did not match the official position that Tesla's later work was crackpot science. Somebody in the United States government believed his late research was real and dangerous. The reason traced back 40 years. In the early 1900s, J.P. Morgan funded Tesla's Wardenclyffe project on Long Island, a 187-foot transmission tower designed to broadcast wireless signals across the Atlantic. Morgan thought he was funding the wireless telegraphy. Then Tesla told him what the tower was actually for. It wasn't going to transmit messages. It was going to transmit power, free electricity distributed through the Earth itself, available to anyone with a properly tuned receiver. No meters, no grid, no way to charge for it. Morgan's response, recorded in correspondence later released by his estate, was a single question. Where do we put the meter? Tesla had no answer. There was no meter. The whole point was that there did not need to be one. Morgan pulled the funding within months. Wardenclyffe was demolished for scrap in 1917. Tesla never recovered financially. The lesson was not lost on him. He spent the next 25 years building privately, quietly, funded by smaller backers, by his own savings, by the steady erosion of his living standards. His final laboratory was modest. His final residence was a hotel room he could barely afford. And somewhere in those final years, the record suggests 1939 to 1941, he built a chamber, a small one, a working one, a demonstration unit calibrated to the Schumann resonance, sealed inside a copper-lined room, wired to a capacitor bank, hidden in the basement of a building most people would walk past without a second glance. He left it functional. He left it wired to power. And he left a label on the switch in his own handwriting, telling whoever found it not to turn it on. He was not protecting the world from his device.
We know that the US government took and still has many of Tesla's files.
He was protecting his device from the world, because Tesla understood by then what would happen if the wrong people found out it actually worked, what they wanted to know. Within weeks of the activation, the requests started arriving. The Department of Energy asked for full copies of the EPA measurements. So did DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So did the National Security Agency. The requests came through formal channels, but the speed of them, and the seniority of the officials signing them, was not normal for academic research into a historical artifact. One of the requests from DARPA asked specifically for the harmonic decay curve of the field after the master breaker was pulled. The team had not published that data. It existed only in raw form, in a single notebook on a single laptop in Whitmore's office. The fact that DARPA knew to ask for it meant somebody at DARPA was already monitoring the project closely enough to know what data existed. Documents later released through Freedom of Information, requests confirmed what the timing already suggested. Multiple federal agencies had been waiting for this, not for this specific discovery, but for proof of concept, for confirmation that Tesla's wireless transmission was achievable, because the implications go far beyond civilian power. A wireless transmission network operating on the Schumann resonance would mean that any receiver anywhere on the planet could be powered without infrastructure. A drone that never has to land, a submarine that never has to surface for fuel, a forward operating base that draws current directly from the ground beneath it. a weapons platform that requires no supply line. Modern doctrine assumes that energy is a logistical constraint. Every modern military operation, at every scale, is structured around the problem of getting fuel and electrical power to the place it is needed. Eliminate that constraint, and the entire shape of warfare changes. The first nation to operationalize a working Schumann transmitter would not just gain a military advantage, it would render every other nation's logistics doctrine obsolete in a single generation. It would also mean something else, something Tesla wrote about in the journals stacked on the chamber shelves, in handwriting that grew more anxious as the years passed. A wireless transmission network can be cut. A power grid is hard to weaponize because it depends on physical cables that have to be physically severed. A wireless transmission system, broadcast from a central transmitter, can be switched off remotely, selectively, surgically. A government with such a network could darken any building, any neighborhood, any city, with no visible action and no possibility of resistance. There would be no cables to repair, no infrastructure to rebuild, just darkness, falling exactly where it had been ordered to fall. Tesla wrote about this directly. He wrote that the technology could either liberate humanity from the tyranny of resource extraction,
thought that there was no way to harness alternating current and ever make it practical,
or enable a form of control more total than any previous form of governance. He did not pretend the choice was easy. He did not pretend he knew which one humanity would pick. He just locked the device away and labeled the switch. Whitmore. The university opened a formal investigation into Whitmore's decision. Several colleagues called for his removal from the project. The fact that the activation had not produced a disaster did not change the fact that he had ignored a warning, written by Tesla himself. Whitmore did not apologize. In an interview months later, sitting in his office with the door closed, he gave his defense in 2 sentences. Tesla left that device there for us. He was saying, "This is real." He elaborated only once. He said the chamber had been wired and accessible for 80 years. He said the warning was written in pencil, not stamped in steel. He said Tesla had every opportunity, in the years before his death, to dismantle the device, destroy the notes, sever the connection to the building's power grid. He had done none of those things. He left it functional, Whitmore said. He left the door reinforced but not welded. He left the switch within reach. He was not trying to make it impossible. He was trying to make it deliberate. Whoever turned that device on was going to have to choose to do it, and then live with the choice. The investigation closed without sanctions. The university did not exonerate Whitmore exactly. They simply stopped asking the question. The data the activation had produced was too valuable, the federal interest too pointed, the scientific significance too undeniable. Punishing the man, who had generated all of it, would have been an act of institutional self-injury. Whitmore lived with his. What's still down there? The chamber is sealed again. The device sits in the same position it has occupied since 1941. The copper coils are dark. The capacitors have been monitored, measured, and left in place. The notes have been digitized, but the originals remain on the shelves where Tesla left them. The wiring is still connected. That is the part nobody at the university has been willing to address publicly. The connection between the chamber and the building's main electrical panel was never severed. The infrastructure that allowed Whitmore to power the device on March 14, 2024, still exists. The capacitor bank is degraded but functional. The coils are intact. The Schumann calibration has not drifted. There were proposals to cut the line. There were internal memos suggesting the chamber should be disconnected from the grid permanently, the capacitor bank discharged, the device rendered incapable of activation. None of those proposals have been acted on. The reason given, in the rare moments anyone has been willing to discuss it on record, is that disconnecting the device would destroy data. The wiring itself is part of the artifact. Cutting it would mean losing information that has not yet been fully studied. That is the official reason.
The idea was initially to make a power plant every block or 2, and then to send power out.
Whether it is the only reason is a question nobody at the university has been willing to answer. The label is still bolted to the panel. 3 words, in Tesla's handwriting, 81 years old now. Resonance chamber, do not activate. There is no guard at the door. There is no permanent monitor on the chamber. There is no government seizure, no classified status, no armed personnel standing between the device and the next person who decides they need to know whether it still works. There is only the door, and the switch, and the label, and a building that most people on campus walk past every day without knowing what is in the basement. Tesla built the device to wait. It is still waiting. So here's the question. Should they ever turn it on again? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to see the other Tesla invention the FBI seized within hours of his death, the one that's still classified, that video is next. Subscribe so you don't miss it.